So, let's get started. We're going to start where we left off. I may do a little review of what we've already covered. So, in the book of Job, we got started last week. And by the way, if you were not here, I will be teaching out of a great Bible that my daughter got me for Christmas. It's a Tony Evans study Bible. So, if you guys want what I'm teaching out of, that's what I'm teaching out of. So, it's got a lot of good stuff in it. It's got barcodes you can scan and get an overview of every book, and got a lot of his wisdom just poured into it. And if you don't, I write my notes in my Bible. You know why I do that? So I don't lose them. Because the word never changes. We may have a different insight about it, and we just write a different note, right? So, but that's why you don't see me with a notepad very often, because I put my notes here. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer before we get this started, and because I may need it if I'm ever going to get us through the book of Job in a year. All right, Lord, thank you for this great day, Lord. Lord, I pray, Lord, that you send the rain. We need the rain so bad. And I just pray, Lord, that you touch every person that is here today. And I pray, Lord, that you touch me to teach what it is you want me to teach and the way you want me to teach it. And I pray, Lord, that it'll be used in the way you want it to be used. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so when we started in the book of Job a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how if you're studying the Bible, different parts of the Bible really explain the book that you're in sometimes better than the book you're studying. You know what I'm saying? So we talked about in the beginning how Deuteronomy 29 and 29, in a nutshell, we won't go back and read it, but in a nutshell, it tells us that we're on a need-to-know basis. And I preach about that a lot, teach about that a lot. And we're on a need-to-know basis. Well, Deuteronomy 29 and 29 basically tells us that, and that, in a nutshell, describes the book of Job. A lot of things happened in the book of Job that Job, he only knew that God was in control. Basically, in a nutshell, that's what he knew. And he knew that he knew what he needed to know. And as time went on, there would be more things that happened. And he would be probably closer to the Lord by the time we get to the end. So, we discovered a lot of things in the first chapter about who wrote the book of Job. We don't know. We talked about that bad things can happen to good people, right? And who's in control? God is, always. We talked about, can rich people live a good, honest Christian life? Well, we found out in the first chapter that yes, they can. He talked about what kind of great man Job was in the first chapter. And we also talked about, do we have to understand everything that we're faced with? Well, I'm glad we don't, because I don't understand a lot of things that happen. I talked about what me and Tammy went through during COVID and being sent to be an over-the-road truck driver when I was a called mission pastor. Didn't make sense. But that was the door that was open, the only door. And that's sort of what the first chapter, that's sort of what we get out of the first chapter. Today we're going to start with the second chapter, and I'm going to tell you like I told you then. We're going to go as far as we go, and then we'll pick up the next time. In the month of June, I'll be teaching 2 weeks in a row, so maybe that'll help us a little bit go from one week to the next. So, let's start. I'm going to try my best to pronounce all these words the best I can. So, I like reading when I'm teaching all the scripture, and that way when I talk about it, we know what we're talking about on the same level. So let's start in the second chapter of the book of Job. Now remember, everything that has done and will be done, God's in control. So we're going to talk about some different things. But what I think is real interesting is at the beginning of every chapter where Satan and the Lord's talking, he gives them guidelines. And so that reinforces the fact that everything we go through is in God's control, even though it may not look like it. When I was over the road and I was sleeping in my sleeper and I was crying at night and praying, Lord, why? Satan tried to blind me with the fact, he tried to make me think that I was the only one that had ever been through that. When just right here in this one book, we realized that I wasn't. And I knew that. And I was telling Pastor Kate the other day, it's funny how some of us that knows the most are blinded the most. You know, you ever done something, you look back and think, stupid, I knew better than that. I do that quite a bit, just ask Tammy. But anyway, you know, that's how things work in life. And as Christians, we're put through those situations. So let's start here in chapter 2, or I won't never even get past chapter 2. One day the sons of God came again to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" "From roaming through the earth," Satan answered, "and walking around on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity." We heard that word several times the last time I was here in the first chapter, integrity. On and on and on. Remember, this is a rich man. We talked about it last time. In today's value, his little farming operation would be worth in the millions. The land alone would be worth in the millions, not counting all the stuff he had on it. But, and here, the word integrity is used again. So that reinforces the fact that the Lord thinks highly of everybody that tries their best to serve him. See what I'm saying? So rich people, poor people, middle of the road, whatever. This just reaffirms again, and I love that it does that over and over and over through the book of Job. It talks about his integrity. Let's get down here and said, a man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil. He still retains his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason. And then Satan said, "Skin for skin." Satan answered the Lord, "A man will give up everything he owns in exchange for his life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bone, and he will surely curse you to your face." "Very well," the Lord told Satan. "He is in your power. Only spare his life." There the Lord goes again. He's sort of agreed to some terms, but he drew the line in the sand. He's still in control. You know, Satan has wanted to pick a fight with somebody, and the Lord gave him somebody that he knew that would be a reputable foe. You know, we talked about that last week. How cool would it be that Satan would be roaming the earth and the Lord say, "Hey, you don't pick on somebody, I'll give you somebody to pick on. Pick on old Gary." That'd be an honor. Who wants to go through what Job went through? Not me. But the honor of being chosen from the Lord to go through that. I look back and think about what Job went through, and it sort of embarrassed me to tell y'all what I went through during COVID in trucking. But it was an honor looking back. It was an honor to have done what I done to get to where I am. I've told Pastor Kate all the years, the Lord blessed me with a great business. How in the world can I pray that the Lord move me out of that business that I prayed so long for, because I want to do more for him? And it was hard sometimes. Me and Tammy had a successful business. We built it from nothing to a really big business over 20 years' time. But we prayed and prayed and prayed the last 4 or 5 years that the Lord move us out of that and more into ministry and more time with our family. That's sort of backwards, right? We prayed for something, the Lord gave it to us. Now here we are praying that he take it away. We didn't know he'd shut the world down to make it happen, but he did. And it's just awesome. He said, he is in your power, only spare his life. So the Lord's setting ground rules. Satan left the Lord's presence and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself while he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." I'm going to stop right here. I preach and teach about my life. And as I've studied this and I've thought about this, I mean, this is not a new story to us. Anybody that's been walking with the Lord for, even if you weren't, as a kid, we've been taught this story. And as I was trying to think about what to say about that, his wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." I don't know. I can't preach from experience, or I can't teach from experience on this subject, because that woman right there, if she said that to me, that would be the most devastating thing in my life. One of the most devastating things. Job, I got thinking this morning, and I'm thinking Job built this big, I call it a business, because cattle and stuff is a business. Back then, it was a livelihood, which that's what businesses are. But I'm thinking he had all this stuff, and he done it with his wife and his family. I'm thinking how impactful and hurtful that would have been. As bad as everything he'd been through, that had to have been one of the worst things. I heard somebody say on TV or on YouTube one day, they was making a joke. I think Tim Hawkins was making a joke about it, about Satan took everything away but his wife. Satan knew what he was doing, because that, up until this point right here, would have had to been the worst thing in the world. Me and Tammy, we feed off each other. When I was over the road, and I was probably at my most miserable time, ministry-wise, because I couldn't do the things I wanted to do, and I couldn't be with my family. I'm a family guy. I've always been raised around my family. None of us ever had a job that took us away from our family. But through all of that, if you ask me, I'd say it's the only door the Lord opened. Me and Tammy stuck strong to that, even though there were times on the road that I didn't know if I'd make enough money to make it, because the margin was so small. And if you've ever been a truck driver and leased on with somebody, they get the biggest part of the deal, and you get the smallest part. It's sort of like working for somebody. You get just a little bit bigger part because you're furnishing the truck, but the margins were tight sometimes. But I could lean on Tammy. Every time I'd say, it's a God thing, it's a God thing, it's got to be a God thing. I don't know why, but it's just got to be a God thing. We've said that, I don't know how many times we've said it. But I always knew I could lean on Tammy. While, right after my mom, it's been nearly a year now, right after my mom passed away, me and Tammy went on a trip. Or she went with me. And we done a bunch of Camping World transfers. We take campers and boats from one part of the country and take them to another part. But anyway, we done about a 3-week run out in the Midwest. That's all we done. Camping World and Lazy Day camping companies would pay us to move campers from one location to another, and it was all out in the Midwest. While we were out there, Tammy gets this job offer to do the nanny job that she's got now. My watch is going crazy. The little Indian guy wants to keep interrupting. But anyway, she gets this job offer to be a nanny. And I said, I don't want you to go. I said, I can't do what I do without you. "34 years. Even when I was at my worst, she was at her best. I wouldn't be here today. I'll tell you, I'm being honest. Wouldn't be here today without her. And here she's fixing to take a job where she can't be with me. But she tells me, she says, I really believe it's a God thing. I could go into the story about how all that happened, but it would take up the whole Sunday school class. But she said, I really believe it's a God thing. And when she tells me that, that's like Pastor Kate's telling me. I believe it's a God thing. Well, that's the end of the story. Because there's no debating after that. If Tammy feels like it's a God thing, it's a God thing. And I said, I don't like it. This is not how I planned it. Me and her done talked about her just traveling with me and us just being paid to retire, basically. We were going to travel the country, and because that was the only door I had open. We just felt like this was the Lord taking us out of a business where we worked 7 days a week from spring to fall to a job that we could be together, travel the country, and just enjoy life. That's just about the only explanation we had for it. And now she was leaving. Well, she goes and does what she's supposed to do. And then that job I told y'all last week, that it was a God thing. That job resulted in the job I have now, hauling for Heil, the company that I haul for. And I'm home every night, home every weekend. It was truly a God thing. But when I read this about Job and his wife, it reminded me of my relationship with my wife. And I'm thinking about all the sickness and all the things that's already been took away. But at that very point, when your wife tells you something that devastating, we're only in the second chapter. There's 42 chapters. That is like the silver bullet that goes to just tears your heart out to me. I didn't know what to say about it, and the Lord said, I was drinking coffee and thinking about this morning. It's like the Lord told me, said, that's how much it hurt, because you don't know. What he was saying was, I have such a good godly wife, and that's how much it hurt. That had to be how much it hurt. That was just shook the world, in my opinion. But Job held his faith. He stood his ground like Tammy does with me a lot of times and said, it's all God. Just, she just probably, I'm sure, wants to smack me sometimes and clear your head and go on. But Job said, you speak as a foolish woman speaks, he told her. Should we accept only good from God and not adversity? Throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. He told her the truth. Tammy tells me the truth a lot of times. I've been going through some stuff lately that I'm only confided in a few people. And Tammy has been right there. Sometimes you see in the movies where somebody just walks up and smacks them and says, get out of that zone. You know what I'm saying? That's what Tammy's been having to do to me lately. Smack me and get me out of that zone. Well, Job had to do this to his wife in a nutshell. That's what he had to do. You speak foolishly. And he told her the truth. Now let's go on to verse 11. Now when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Nehemite, heard about all this adversity that had happened to him, each of them came from his home. They met together to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they looked from a distance, they could barely recognize him. That's how sick he was. That's how many boils he had over him. They wept aloud, and each man tore his robe and threw dust into the air on his head. Then they sat on the ground with him 7 days and nights, but no one spoke a word to him because they saw that his suffering was very intense. Tony Evans said down here, he said, sometimes the best comfort you can provide is your quiet presence. Remember to weep with those who weep. And it talks about that in Romans. We're going to learn a lot more about the friends. But right here, those were some good friends that sat down with him. They really couldn't say anything, because they knew the best medicine right now was just being there. When I was over the road, Pastor Cates would call me every now and then, just check on me. And we talked, but he was just being there for me. I was like didn't know, I was out in the world I had never been in. I went to places I'd never been. And every now and then the phone would ring and it would be Kate, or it'd be my mom, or it'd be Scott Clifton, a friend of mine, or somebody. They were there for me when the times were tough. And that meant a lot to me. I wasn't where Job was, but I was in a place I had never been. I had the support of my wife. Job didn't have that, but I did have the support of my wife. And the fact that I had friends that was with me meant a lot to me. And we're going to see as we go on later that they may not have been the friends we thought they was. We're going to jump and go on into chapter 3 here. Hey, we're already ahead of lifetime. We're done. We done accomplished one chapter. We're going into another one. So there may be hope yet. After this, Job began to speak and curse the day he was born. It was pretty bad. He said, "May the day I was born perish, and the night that said a boy is conceived. If only that day had turned to darkness, may God above not care about it, or light shine on it. May darkness and gloom reclaim it, and a cloud settle over it. May what darkness the day terrify it. If only darkness had taken that night away. May it not appear among the days of the year, or be listed in the calendar. Yes, may that night be barren. May no joyful shout be heard in it. Let those who curse days condemn it, those who are ready to rouse," and I ain't figured out this word, Leviathan, that's how I'm going to pronounce it. "May its morning stars grow dark, may it wait for daylight, but have none. May it not see the breaking of dawn. For the night did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, and hide sorrow from my eyes. Why was I not stillborn? Why didn't I die as I came from the womb? Why did the knees receive me, and why were there breasts for me to nurse? Now I would certainly be lying down in peace. I would be asleep, then I would be at rest, with the kings and counselors of the earth, who rebuild ruined cities for themselves, or with the princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not hidden like a miscarried child, like infants who never see daylight? There the wicked cease to make trouble, and there the weary find rest. The captives are completely at rest. They do not hear a taskmaster's voice. Both small and great are there, and the slave is set free from his master. Why is light given to one burdened with grief, and life to those whose existence is bitter, who wait for death, but it does not come, and search for it more than for hidden treasure, who are filled with much joy, and are glad when they reach the grave." I want you to listen to verse 23. "Why is life given to a man whose path is hidden, whom God has hedged in?" He didn't say it was God's fault. Tony Evans wrote down here, he says, notice that Job didn't say, "Look at what Satan has done to me." He didn't understand why terrible things had happened to him, but he knew that he had come from the hand of his sovereign God. In other words, God allowed it to happen. He knew that Satan couldn't have done anything without God, basically what he's saying. Let's go down to verse 24. "I sigh when food is put before me, and my groans pour out like water. For the thing I feared had overtaken me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I cannot relax or be calm. I have no rest, for turmoil has come." That's a pretty bad day. The day you wish you had never been born. He goes into great detail. It wasn't like that he was just having a bad day. This right here, he was having a bad time in general. And he broke this down so much so that it made you think that he had a lot of time to sit around. I guess, and I reflect back to his wife wanting him just to give up and quit. I guess that pushes you to a place that you reflect on all the things of your life, and you reflect on all the people that didn't have all the things that he had and all the opportunity he had. And I guess at some point in your mind, because you have to be crazy at this point. Back when I was over the road, before Mom passed away, this past April was a year ago, I got COVID. And I was on the road. I was in out North Little Rock, Arkansas, when I realized that something wasn't right. And I text Tammy. I was within, I think it's 5 or 6 hours from the house at that point. And I text Tammy and I said, I'm coming home. Usually I wouldn't come home unless I was out 2.5, 3 weeks. I'd come home for 2 or 3 days and leave out again. But I hadn't been out that long, but I'd gotten sick. And I come home, and while I was home, I didn't realize all this. Tammy and Thomas and everybody was telling me how bad I'd gotten. During that time, I'd gotten delusional. And Tammy'd say I'd get up in the middle of the night and just walk around the bed for just long amounts of time. And I'd lay back down, and instantly I'd get back up, and I'd walk around the bed and pace the floors. I'd come back to bed. She said I'd do that all night. And I'd be soaking wet with sweat, and I'd kick the covers off, and then I'd cover up. I was freezing, and Kenny Carr, a friend of mine, said he called me one day. He said he knew something wasn't right. And like I said, I'm just going by reports I got from other people. But I'd gotten to a delusional point, and thank the Lord for my son Thomas and Deidre that comes here. They, when Deidre found out how sick I was, she got me into the hospital and got me fixed up, and thank the Lord for good people, and thank the Lord for bringing me out of that. But I was delusional. I didn't even know what I was doing. That's how sick I was. And I look back and think that everything going on, then you throw COVID on top of it, was I to the point that my body couldn't handle it no more. Because when I say that I would sit down in my truck and cry and pray at night, I was at a point I didn't know what else to do. I mean, that's all I knew to do. Job, he was doing all he needed to do was keep going. That's what I was doing. I was keeping going. I'm not comparing my life to Job. I'm just saying that I have walked in some difficult situations when I didn't know. Sometimes our old body just can't handle everything. The older I've gotten, the more emotional I get. I don't know if it's because I realize how sensitive and how fragile life is. But I get over that, and then a week or two later, Mom passes away. And I think about Job. I didn't go through nothing what Job went through. But my body had all it could take. I can't imagine, and I'm going back to what his wife said, but I can't imagine you lost all your family, you lost everything you worked hard and paid for and built up, then your wife basically puts a knife in your back, basically. I mean, that's how it would have to feel. And now you're talking about you wish you had never been born. I don't know how much more I could have took. And I was not even a drop in the ocean of what Job had been through. I don't know in another few weeks if things had kept going like they were going. I don't know that I wouldn't have been thinking like Job was thinking. We have to put ourselves in his shoes to really, when we study this. It's one thing to read it and talk about what another man went through and another group of people went through. I ask you guys all the time when I preach, I say, do you believe in this word? And everybody says, yeah. Do you believe that this is a living, breathing word? That's hard for some people to say yes to. Because if you've not lived it, you don't know it. I've not lived what Job lived, but I have lived and walked down a trail that was difficult. And to say it without sounding like, I don't know. I'm just going to say that I understand why he's where he is. And thank the Lord, I never been that far. I've never wished that I've not been born. I, I have cried and asked the Lord why a many a times. And me and Tammy together has asked the Lord why on a lot of things. But until you've been down that road and actually lived this word, I don't think you fully can understand the text of the word. Let's go on down to chapter 4. Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied, should anyone try to speak with you when you're exhausted? Yet who can keep you from speaking? Indeed, you have instructed many and have strengthened weak hands. Your words have steadied the one who was stumbling and braced the knees that were buckling. But now that this is happening to you, you have become exhausted. It strikes you and you are dismayed. Isn't your piety your confidence, and your integrity of your life your hope? Consider who has perished when he was innocent. Remember that. I'm going to read that again. Consider who has perished when he was innocent. We'll come back to that in just a second. Where have the dishonest been destroyed? In my experience, those who plow injustice and those who sow trouble reap the same. They perished at a single blast from God and come to an end by the breath of his nostrils. The lions may roar and the fierce lion growl, but the teeth of the young lions are broken. The strong lion dies if it catches no prey, and the cubs of the lioness are scattered. A word was brought to me in secret. My ears caught a whisper of it. Among unsettling thoughts from visions in the night, when deep sleep comes over men, fear and trembling came over me, and made all my bones shake. I felt a draft on my face, and the hair on my body stood up. A figure stood there, but I could not recognize its appearance. A form loomed before my eyes. I heard a whispering voice. Can a mortal be righteous before God? Can a man be more pure than his Maker? If God puts no trust in his servants, and he charges his angels with foolishness, how much more those who dwell in clay houses, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed like a moth. They are smashed to pieces from dawn till dusk. They perish forever while no one notices. Are their tent cords not pulled up? They die without wisdom. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this the further we go, but when you tell somebody that you're a mission pastor, and the Lord has picked you up and made you a over-the-road truck driver, hotshot truck driver, you ought to see some of the looks you get. Not verbally, but I felt their presence, if you know what I mean. They didn't have to say a word. I felt the negativity around some people. I had a lot of support from a lot of people, but there were those few that you got to thinking, well, is Gary out of church now, or what's happened with Gary and Tammy, or what's going on? I could just feel the thoughts coming out of their head and see what they were saying. There's no way the Lord would take a called mission pastor and put him over the road and take him out of church that much. Because I rarely made it. I could feel it. How many of y'all ever felt the negativity? I could feel it. I had nobody verbally tell me that. But I've told Kate this before. I could just, they say you can cut the tension with a knife. I could feel that. And now, if things weren't bad enough, he don't want to live. Now one of his friends has said, you must have done something wrong. Let me find it here right quick. I told y'all to remember. Well, I told you the wrong verse to remember. Verse 8, it said, in my experience, those who plow injustice and those who sow trouble reap the same. Dr. Tony Evans said Eliphaz was a strict believer in cause and effect, and his theology didn't allow for exceptions. His attitude is summed up. Notice Dr. Tony Evans says attitude. His attitude is summed up in this claim. In my experience, those who plow injustice and those who sow trouble reap the same. Eliphaz thought that the only way you could be treated like this is if you done something wrong. Hello? Jesus didn't do nothing wrong. I mean, lots of people throughout this living and breathing Bible have had things happen in their life. And God allowed things to happen in their life. We, in raising kids, or if you run a company and you're a boss or a worker or whatever, sometimes the best lesson anybody can learn is what? When they learn on their own. Sometimes we have to let our kids mess up and let them walk through adversity and let them do things on their own. I got perfect kids. I don't know, y'all may not, but I got perfect kids. But sometimes me and Tammy struggle with this, try not to be a control freak. We look at each other sometimes, and I tell Tammy, I said, look, they got to learn on their own. You know, we didn't get to be a perfect married couple for 34 years. You know, we're not perfect. I better just say that right now before lightning. We are having storms. So I don't want to get struck down by lightning behind the pulpit. But after everything that's happened, and the sickness, he's lost everything. The sickness, his wife sort of betrays him. And now the first friend has called him out, basically in a nutshell, saying, well, you must have done something wrong. I want to read something. I can't read it. I ain't got my phone. Will you go get my phone? I want to read it for you. I saved something on my phone, and I never leave my phone. I left my phone in Tammy's van. And it's the way I wanted to end this. It's the only note I had, and I read it this morning on Facebook of all places. I'm not going to go into chapter 5 because we're going to get on into some more stuff, and we ain't got a whole lot of time left. But the biggest thing, I don't know if y'all have noticed, but everywhere we've covered so far from chapter 1 all the way through to chapter 4, which Job's not spoke about this yet in chapter 4, but even when he talked to his wife, he basically set her straight and said, should we accept only good from God and not adversity? And it said, throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So through all that, he's good. Even all of this where he is saying that he wished he had not been born, he's basically just questioning why all this was allowed to happen, why he just didn't die at birth, and he wouldn't have to went through all this. But I'm going to read this right here, and there's two things I may read. Job didn't get talked about from the Lord, and Job didn't get put up against Satan. In other words, God didn't pick Job for no reason. Job was a man. He had integrity, and it talks about there was no one else like him. I read something this morning, and it reminded me of Job. I was actually on Facebook when I read this, and somebody posted it. And this is sort of how I think Job was up until we start reading about all the Bible, even through all this. But this is the kind of person I think Job would have been. And this is a quote from Coach Bobby Bowden. It said, all good living is done on bended knee. When your knee is on the ground, your face is never far above the dirt from which you were made. And he goes on to say that's a good starting point for any person who hungers for wisdom. That could describe Job. And to me, that describes what has gotten Job to this point right here. Because had he not had the wisdom to know that God may have allowed these things to happen, he even talks about it. He knows that God's in control. He talks about it, and we've read about it coming up through here. To have known all of that, he'd had to have a great relationship. Like, how would God know he was full of integrity unless he had that relationship with him, right? And how did God know that he could withstand the storms unless he had the relationship? So over time, that relationship between Job and God built up that integrity we hear talk about a lot. Billy Graham was asked to speak one time. They were going to honor him for what they were doing. He was already up in age. He was in his 90s. And he was 92 years old. And he was asked, they didn't ask him to speak. They told him they wanted him to come and they were going to honor him. And he was already struggling with his Parkinson's, and he didn't really want to go. He talked about not really wanting to go. But I'm going to read this to y'all. And this, to me, describes Job. When the title of this message that Billy Graham, he used this later on in a sermon. The title of the sermon was The New Suit. If y'all want to look it up. It said, when Billy Graham was 92 years old, he was struggling with Parkinson's disease. In January, a month before his 93rd birthday, leaders in Charlotte, North Carolina invited their favorite son, Billy Graham, to a luncheon in his honor. Billy Graham initially hesitated to accept the invitation because of his struggles with Parkinson's. But the Charlotte leaders said, we don't expect a major address, just come and let us honor you. So he agreed. After wonderful things were said about him, Dr. Graham stepped to the podium, looked at the crowd, and said, I am reminded today of Albert Einstein, the great physicist, who this month has been honored by Time magazine as the man of the century. Einstein was once traveling from Princeton on a train when the conductor came down the aisle punching the tickets of every passenger. When he came to Einstein, Einstein reached in his vest pocket. He couldn't find his ticket, so he reached in his trouser pocket. It wasn't there. He looked in his briefcase but couldn't find it. Then he looked in the seat beside him and still couldn't find it. I had to do this on 2 or 3 pictures, so I'm having to scroll over. The conductor said, Dr. Einstein, I know who you are. We all know who you are. I'm sure you bought a ticket. Don't worry about it. Einstein nodded. I lost my place. Well, I had to do this on 2 different pictures, so. All right. Einstein nodded appreciatively. In other words, the conductor said, hey, don't worry about it. We know you bought a ticket. All right, let's go on. And so the conductor continued down the aisle punching tickets. As he was ready to move to the next car, he turned around and saw Einstein down on his hands and knees looking under his seat for his ticket. The conductor rushed back and said, Dr. Einstein, don't worry. I know who you are. No problem. You don't need a ticket. I'm sure you bought one. Einstein looked at him and said, young man, I too know who I am. What I don't know is where I'm going. Having said that, Billy Graham continued, see the suit I'm wearing? It's a brand new suit. It's a brand new suit. My children and grandchildren are telling me I've gotten a little, and I don't know this word. Y'all may know it. Slovenly? Never heard that word. In my old age. I used to be a bit more fastidious. I'm from Sand Mountain. We don't use those words. So I went out, bought a new suit for this luncheon, and one more occasion. So in other words, he bought this suit for this luncheon and one more occasion. You know what the occasion is? This is the suit in which I'll be buried. But when you hear I am dead, I don't want you to immediately remember the suit I'm wearing. I want you to remember this. I not only know who I am, sound familiar? I also know where I am going. Sound like Job. May your trouble be less, your blessings be more, and may nothing but happiness come through your door. Life without God is like an unsharpened pencil. It has no point. May each of us have lived our lives so that when our ticket is punched, we don't have to worry about where we are going. There ain't but one kind of person that can live through just what Job has went through so far in these 42 chapters in this book, and we've just went through 4 of them. Job knew who God was and who was in control. He didn't have to like it. He just had to live with it until things got better and the Lord showed fit to give him a little bit more knowledge about what was going on. You remember what I said? We're on a need-to-know basis. He'll tell us what we need to know when we need to know it. Love you guys. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll do 2 weeks in a row. We'll pick up right here. Hope you enjoyed it.